Okay, let's keep breaking down this roster for North Carolina Courage because we're still operating in preseason mode a little bit until that official whistle kicks off the things on March 25th. So let's take a look at how they sort of presented a preseason roster here. They had three goalkeepers listed with Marissa Bova, Casey Murphy, Caitlin Rowland. They had 10 defenders: Malaya Berkeley, Sydney Collins, the draftee, Estelle Johnson, their free agent signing, Emily Fox, Kaylee Kurtz, Kiki Pickett, Ryan Williams. That's 10 for defenders. And we've got 8 midfielders: Emily Gray, Denise O'Sullivan, Brianna Pinto, Clara Robbins, Meredith Speck, Frankie Tagliafieri. Then we've got 9 forwards. Okay, Tess Bode, Millie Farrow, Millie Jill Jensen, Haley Hopkins, Tyler Lucy listed as a forward, Rick Madison, Caroline, Brittany Radcliffe, and Olivia Wingate. Jennifer Cujo was initially a non-roster invitee, but we haven't seen her named in any official capacity to any of the preseason roster. So, curious about that if there's a path for this player to link up with the Courage. But in terms of what we're seeing in front of us, outside of maybe some of the players that we chatted about already, those acquisitions, we talked about Tyler Lucy and how they maybe want to utilize her, thinking, hey, maybe they're going to utilize her in the outside back position, but they've got her listed as a forward, in this preseason roster. And that's not to say that she might not go to a converted outside back position, because that's ultimately what we saw with Angel City. She was also listed as a forward with that team. Saw time on the top line with Angel City, but as injuries and things sort of came into play, we saw Angel City and Freya Coombe kind of shake some things around, and we saw Tyler Lucy get some shifts in at outside back. So I'm a little curious if this will stay the way it is. But 9 forwards, that's a hefty number, I think, compared to some of the other rosters that we've seen anywhere from 5, 6, or 7.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is a lot to have 9 forwards. And for Tyler Lucy, I think we'll see her across the back line. It doesn't really matter what her position says on the roster. Coach can play her anywhere he wants. I mean, we talked about that with Freya Coombe and Angel City. Who knows where these players could play? But when you look at this North Carolina roster and kind of how everything is broken down, one name that I am interested to watch this year is Emily Gray. This is a midfielder for North Carolina Courage that is in her second year with the Courage. She was drafted in 2022, and she didn't do that much last year. She didn't. I was a little disappointed, and maybe it was the situation she was put in. Maybe it was the season. Maybe it was the team, the style of play, the formation. But this was a number 3 draft pick out of the 2022 draft, going to North Carolina. Massive for this type of player, out of Virginia Tech. Maybe a little bit unassuming, but a top-notch player. And now that they have shifted some things around in the midfield, I mean, honestly, having Dabinia leave this roster changes things. How are we going to see North Carolina roll out in their formation? Because you're no longer building a formation and a team around one individual player, Dabinia. That's what was happening before, and it worked really well for North Carolina. Now they have a little bit more freedom, I think, to utilize players in the best way for them. I'm looking at someone like a Denise O'Sullivan. Defensively, she's got to be their go-to in the midfield. She's wearing the captain's armband for this team this year. This is a player in Denise O'Sullivan that has got to step up. And I think Emily Gray can learn from a player like Denise O'Sullivan and understand that the freedom and the flexibility in the midfield with this team. And depending on how they're going to play, I think someone like an Emily Gray could be utilized a lot this year. But when you look at this front line and these forwards that are listed, I don't know who's going to start because there are 9 listed and a lot of question marks there. I mean, Caroline is a shoo-in for this team and kind of her position on it. But otherwise, there's a lot of question marks around this front line 9 players.
No, I'm with you, and I think it's important to sort of know the midfield in that, and how they will connect to who potentially is going to be that top line there. I think Emily Gray is a good shout to sort of note that you want to maybe see a player take that next step. Yeah, this is a look. This is a franchise that has had now two consecutive first rounds with multiple picks. And I don't think it's an unfair question to ask, like, what's going to be the next step in the development for some of these players when you've got that many first round picks. The general concept around that is, oh, like you're gonna get some pretty good talent if you've
Mhm.
got not just one, but multiple first rounders.
Yeah.
And the general mindset being like, oh, maybe some of them might fall to the second rounds, and maybe you can get, a somewhat ready player out of there if you go ahead and continue the development. So maybe coming out of last year when you still had, someone like Debinha, when you still have someone um, like a Denise O'Sullivan or even a Meredith Speck at this point, who's been with the team for some time, do those first year players get an opportunity to get extended minutes. Maybe we saw that go to some players like a Diana Ordonez or
Yeah.
Caroline, an international signing that they made, for attacking purposes, right? So I'm curious as to what that next step is going to be, not just for their current draft class, but what's that next step going to be for the draft class that they had just last year. Where's the development? We want to see it, right? But I'm also looking at somebody like a Brianna Pinto, right? This is someone who's technically going to enter third year, I believe, with
Yep.
in the NWSL, and I'm eager to sort of see her kind of rise and become a face of this franchise, right? Spend a lot of time in North Carolina with UNC, and I think it's someone that they can try to continue to build around and build with. And what that's going to look like in 2023, I think we'll find out right away. So um pure again, a lot of question marks. I think then there are answers for North Carolina Courage right now in terms of the roster in front of them. But it leads us to wonder, like, who in 2023 for the Courage is going to be that young prospect to look out for? Who do we want to see maybe have a breakout year, and who is going to be that experienced veteran perhaps that they lean on? We're talking a little bit about the back-to-back draft classes that this team had, and just coming out of this most recent one, you and I hung out in Philly, got to see this up close. We're gonna go with Olivia Wingate here out of Notre Dame, because we talked a little bit about how they made those selections in the first round, and you said, hey, maybe there was some talent there that you thought that they should have went with, but
Yeah.
they ended up making a different selection. And I think Olivia Wingate might have been one of these players that perhaps raised a couple eyebrows and peaked a couple ears up when the name was called for North Carolina Courage. But strong program in Notre Dame,
Huge.
scored a lot of goals, and listen, it's a World Cup year. We've talked a lot about that, how when there are international cycles that come into play, that there are certain players and opportunity, or there are certain opportunities that present themselves to players, and maybe they'll get a chance to capitalize on those opportunities in front of them. So we're going with Olivia Wingate.
I think this is a good shout as a young prospect to keep an eye on because during the draft, there were maybe more eligible, qualified, best available players still on the board, and Sean Nahas went with Wingate, not a local product. She's outside of Boston and from Massachusetts. Went to Notre Dame, and as you mentioned, had a stellar career: 14 goals, 5 assists in her final season in 2022 at Notre Dame. So one season alone. Led her team throughout the NCAA tournament to the Elite Eight. She was a first team All ACC selection, a third team All American selection. This was a big time player that maybe didn't have the spotlight as some of the other players that were initially listed in this draft. And I think that's something that maybe drew Sean Nahas to a player like Wingate because of the draft class that they got: Sydney Collins, Claire Robbins, Haley Hopkins, Olivia Wingate. None of these names were so top notch, right? Of what these players could do in terms of this draft class. But I think Olivia Wingate is one that could really step into this team. I mean, picture her, Olivia Wingate, as this type of forward alongside someone like a Caroline, ahead of someone in the midfield, like an Emily Gray, Denise O'Sullivan, or Brianna Pinto. I could see that type of midfield happening. I'm excited about what Wingate can do with this team. And I think North Carolina Courage is going to have to lean on some of these players that are first year experience or second year experience, and how they can step up and do that. And Wingate's one that's ready for it coming out of Notre Dame for sure.
I'm excited to see what this player can do, especially, I mean, we're talking about, whether or not some of these younger players are going to have the opportunity to get more time. So I think if she does, maybe it's something alongside of or inside of a Challenge Cup, maybe we'll get to see some exciting moments from this player. But with so many players sort of either entering a sophomore season or a first year as a professional, of course, we anticipate that maybe they'll try to pull from, their experienced veterans around them. And while we're talking a little bit about the offseason earlier in this episode and the losses that this team had, there were a lot of veteran pieces that are no longer with this team. So yes, we still see someone on this Courage roster with Denise O'Sullivan. Really the only remaining piece from those former championship years. But who else is going to be that player that could sort of step up and sort of be provide that leadership? And you know what? I think we're still looking along the defensive line in this one, even in the absence of someone like an Abby Urseg or Carson Pickett. And we're going to go with Kaylee Kurtz. We feel like this is a player who's already become a little bit of an important piece for this Courage back line. And I think in light of some of those offseason departures, Kurtz is in a really strong position to kind of maybe emerge as one of those faces or one of those vocal leaders for this team in 2023.
I agree completely. Kaylee Kurtz is a player that stepped up immensely in 2022. She solidified her position in that back line. She started 22 matches. Every game that she played in, she started. And really, she took shots throughout the year. She contributed in the attack as a center back. That's really difficult to do, but that's the confidence that we're seeing from Kaylee Kurtz and this type of team. And when you look at the players that North Carolina lost across their backline, Merritt Mathias, Abby said, Carson Pickett, it leaves room for someone like a Kaylee Kurtz to really step in and take over that back line. I imagine we'll see someone like an Estelle Johnson and a Kaylee Kurtz solidify themselves in that center back duo, playing alongside an Emily Fox in an outside back role. That's really exciting to me. But Kaylee Kurtz is the one amongst Johnson and Fox that has the experience playing in North Carolina under Sean Nahas last year and understands what it's like to play behind someone like a Denise this year that she can take to the next level. She can build off of in 2022, where she became a solidified starter on this roster. Now continue that into consistency and leadership, vocal organization on this roster. I think it could be a really good year for Kaylee Kurtz.
I want to see. I also want to see Kaylee Kurtz score some more goals. I mean, there were a couple moments there and during the season with the Courage where it was her actually coming up big on some of those set piece plays, and not necessarily Abby Urseg, who was maybe in the past kind of like a more frequent target for them. So I would love to see it. You would like to see it. And I think this is the year to see it, because we're talking about how there's a cycle. There's a World Cup year coming up here in 2023, and there's a lot of players on this team that the Courage may say goodbye to for a certain period of time. Now, these are just predictions. Several months out from the World Cup, there have not been any final rosters named yet for certain international teams, but we're going off the assumption that, I don't know, somebody like a Caroline is going to go to the World Cup with Brazil. Somebody like Denise O'Sullivan will be on that final roster for Ireland. But there's some unknowns in terms of who else might, be unavailable for this team in 2023 for long stretches of time? Is Naomi Mira going to, be with Japan in the World Cup? Are they going to lose a couple of their Danish players, right? Whether it's in somebody like Jensen or Madsen. So that's a hefty amount of players. I think when you've got more than three that potentially can make an exit during the season, that's a big thing. And the list just keeps going because there's also the possibility of Casey Murphy
Yeah.
not being available for this team as well, and the possibility of her being on international duty with the United States.
Yeah.
So we're talking anywhere from the possibility of three locks to to six players missing for at least a hefty chunk of time here. So maybe this is the year that we're going to see some opportunities present themselves to some of the younger players on this team.
I agree completely. 6 players to lose is a lot of players to lose, and I imagine they'll all be starters or giving significant time to North Carolina. I think some of the big names, I mean, Casey Murphy, you're losing your starting goalkeeper at this point to go to the World Cup with the United States. Now, you do have an incredible veteran in Caitlin Rowland. You've also got Marissa Bova there to kind of slot into that role, but it's really tricky to lose your goalkeeper. It's really tough for these teams to do that. And then Caroline and Denise O'Sullivan, these two are incredible players. They're leaders. They're game changers on the pitch for North Carolina and for their respective countries when they play. I mean, that's going to be a big loss. Those are going to be some holes to fill. How does Sean Nahas fix that? Find those holes? Is there a formation change? How do you make sure that you're giving these 6 potential players that are leaving with their country in the middle of the summer enough time at the start of the season to get your team in a right position? That's the big balance. Can you get your team in the right position, stack up as many points, wins, ties, 3 and 1 point games? That way you're sitting at a pretty good position in the table by the time July comes around. And now you're saying goodbye to some big starters, while also throughout the first several months of the season, giving time to some of these younger players because they're going to have to step in. And you want that to be a seamless transition when your internationals leave. That's the biggest question mark. I think Denise O'Sullivan is one that it's going to be really hard for this team to lose come World Cup time, as she makes her departure with Ireland, a debutante in the World Cup this year. That's a spot I'm really looking at, the midfield for North Carolina.
We'll see. I love hearing you talk about it a little bit in terms of how the absence of some of these World Cup players might affect the team this season, because I think that kind of transitions into our biggest burning question for this team in this season. We chatted a little bit about it earlier in the beginning of this preseason. Yes, they were a team that ended up being contenders, like for real, in contention bubble playoff team. And they started off their 2022 with a Challenge Cup win. So you've got an exciting start and you've got an exciting finish for this team in 2022. And there was a whole chunk of middle where they were fighting to no longer be in last place during the regular season. So we saw two different halves of a season for this North Carolina Courage team in 2022, and we really saw them turn it on towards that second half with these amazing individual performances, whether it was out of Debinha or Diana Ordonez breaking a rookie record with goals scored. So what's that going to mean for this team in 2023? The biggest burning question we have for them is, can they put together a consistent season in the regular season for 2023?
We just did not see any consistency, I don't think, from North Carolina in 2022. It was a struggle. They had really high highs and then really low lows. After they won the Challenge Cup, I think there was a bit of pressure on this team, and the regular season came and kind of smacked them in the face like the cold on a winter day. And they had breakout players like a Caroline, a Diana Ordonez to run things down at the end of the season and push them into playoff contention. But can they be that consistency? And I think it does come into play during the international break, and how they're going to stay on top of it, how they're going to stay consistent. They can't let up. They've got to really continue to grind and put together complete 90-minute games over the course of the entirety of the season. And if they can do that, they will be another team that's pushing for a playoff spot at the end of it. I don't think they'll be this top powerhouse team of North Carolina that we've seen in the past. There's just too many new pieces that they have to put together, but they could be another playoff contention team. They'll be on the bubble at the end of this season.
All right, so then that's going to lead us into our projected finish for this team in 2023. We love ranges here. We love guesstimations. We love to give a spectrum for everyone to fall on here. So we're looking at North Carolina Courage to close out their 2023. There's a possibility that they can, go on a run like they did in 2022 and actually break through to the playoffs, maybe as a 6 seed. But things can also go awry, and we have them falling as low as 9th if things go the opposite direction for them. So somewhere between 6 and 9. 6 would be an improvement because they ended off in 2022 in 7th, and obviously 8 or 9 would be a little bit of a step back for them. So we'll have to see where they lie.
Yeah, but even at a 6, you're making the playoffs at that point, but we don't really have them much higher than that. I don't think they'll host. They definitely won't be a top 1 or 2 team this year, but they could get in there. They could travel, be on the road for the first couple rounds of playoffs. Postseason comes, who knows what could happen? Anything can happen in the postseason. But yeah, I think it'll be a tough season for North Carolina. It'll be tough for them to kind of pull out and get that consistency factor down.
I heard that.